Okay, thanks for joining me on the desk. So, what I did was I have a Project Life card and I pressed, excuse me, I placed the recipe inside of the card. So, I'll put somewhere a list here of the things that we talk about as far as the ingredients are concerned. So, in case you can't read this or can't see this, it's okay. Of course, if you have a question, or you have your own comments to add to the discussion, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. Okay, the ingredients are 1 cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and those things I want to add in. Make sure you use exactly the first time, what the recipe calls for. You may have your own idea of what type of sugar, what type of ground cinnamon, or what type of flour. But when a person gives you a recipe, always cook it the way they want it done the first time. After that, you can sort of kind of try your own way. Otherwise, you would never know what the original recipe was meant to taste like, because subtle changes, trust me, will cause you to mess up the recipe and you won't have what they originally intended you to have. Okay. So, also 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of baking salt. That's why I mentioned one of the comments about making sure you do it exactly the way the person intended you to make it, because one time I tasted some food that someone had prepared for me and they said, oh, I don't need baking soda or baking powder, but it was one of those, and the recipe fell flat. So needless to say, that one elimination of the ingredient caused them to mess up the whole recipe. It still tasted good, but the presentation was floppy. Oh, by the way, this worked great. For about 2 hours, the drink that I had in here, the almond milk, stayed warm. So I'm going to be switching to this thermos every time I do a recording. So this time, it just has water in there right now for this portion. But definitely for hot drinks, I'm going to be using this thermos. Okay, so one thing I wanted to share about the process and how I put together the banana bread was I put all of the dry ingredients together in a little, I want to call it sifter, but it's one of those, I can't remember the name of it right now, but I think it is called a sifter. But it's this, what I do is pretty much I put the flour, put the ground cinnamon, put the sugar in there, put the baking soda, everything, the powder and the salt, all the dry ingredients together as one, and then I sift it through, into a bowl. So what I thought about that was a lot of times you'll have ingredients within your life or people that come across your path, and you need a system to filter them through, especially as a small business owner. So the more people that you have on your team who are pulling for you, wanting you to succeed, sometimes filter an idea through them. It's not that everybody's critical, but there are some people that will offer you constructive advice to get you going on a good path, make things easier for you so you don't have to struggle as much. Because in the microwave society, we expect things in a perfect atmosphere. In fact, I just came back from Staples today, and the clerk suggested to open up the box which I had delivered there. And one thing I remember, that a lot of times when I receive packages, though they were marketed perfectly in picture, things happen along the way that caused the mug to break, or it was the wrong order, or so many little things that can throw you off, As far as being a small business owner or just being a student, you have to allow it to sift through, a process. So I was learning all of that while I was baking. Okay. So then in a separate bowl, I put the wet ingredients together, which is a stick of butter, and make sure it's unsalted. A baker one time shared with me, of course, having had baked anything in my life, especially from scratch. I was like, what's the difference, unsalted or salted? She was like, you can control the salt level when it's unsalted, especially if a person is diabetic. You want to be able to control the salt level. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So then 2 large eggs, 3 ripe bananas, and make sure they've been sitting around for a while, and then a tablespoon of milk. Now, this is the part where I altered it a little bit, because at that time I wasn't drinking regular dairy milk, so I did substitute it with almond milk and made it super moist. And then so bringing all the ingredients together, you have your dry ingredients, then you have your wet ingredients. I don't just dump it all together at one time. Big spoonfuls of the flour into the wet ingredient, and then I stir it all together. And let me back up a little bit. And even just preparing for the recipe, what I do is I place the butter and the eggs out at room temperature. If I know I'm going to be baking this recipe that day, I put it out first thing in the morning, so by the time I get around to putting the ingredients together, the butter has had time to soften, at least to room temperature, and also the eggs. I learned a long time ago that you want these ingredients at room temperature. It makes it a lot easier to deal with. Even though I don't have a mixer, a lot of times because they're at room temperature, it still makes it easy to mix. So even if you don't have the right equipment the way the recipe calls for, you can still make the ingredients despite what they call for, in the recipe. Because you'll find online they have tons of recipes and tons of ways to do it. You have to do it the way that you're most comfortable with the first time. After that, you can build on top of that, develop your craft, and develop a system in where if you're going to have to bake for a group or even a small party, you know how you do work your system already. Okay. So therefore, I blend all the ingredients together, and it smells wonderful, so I'm even being ministered to by what I'm preparing, because I know it's going to taste good. I leave it in the oven, for 1 hour at 325. And I just set it and forget it. The kind of little oven that we have, you could just time it and I don't have to think about it. Believe me, after about a half an hour to 45 minutes, the aroma is going to fill the room. So even if you decide to bake this right before a meeting or right before you sit down for dinner, or even if you get up early in the morning, you can prepare this the night before, and leave it in the refrigerator, and the next morning, I've never tried that, but this is a suggestion that you may want to try. And the next morning, you can prepare it, because one thing that'll happen is that you need to bring it back up to room temperature before you put it in the oven. And also, another thing I wanted to mention was that I didn't have the 9 by 5 by 3 pan. I just used what I had. In fact, let me show you a picture. So I used what I had in order to prepare it. So no, it didn't look like the loaf that you normally see online or on television, but I still was able to slice it up into small pieces, and everybody had a portion at home, in the studio, and also the youth group. So that's all I wanted to share for this, and I keep this with me so I don't have to open up my phone or dig for the recipe anymore. I used to keep it on my PDA, but I had to switch that out, and I keep it right here in the pocket of my travel notebook. So when I'm out on the road, if anybody wants the recipe or if I need to prepare it while I'm out there, I have it with me. So thank you so much for joining me for another session of Chief Artisan Thursday. Please feel free to go to tlctown.com and look through some of the other things that we have to offer as far as other trainers, other small business owners, and even those that don't own a small business, but they definitely contribute a lot of creative content for us to bring to you in order to set your environment and your atmosphere. So take care. Drop me a note. I have a new email now, ladynick@toctown.com, so you can reach me directly. All right, take care.